Welcome to our Thursday exclusive. It's so great to have everyone here. I am super excited because this week we get to have our friends that are here from RISC talking about xACTION. And we're going to talk a lot about all of the cool stuff you can do with the data that you collect using XCL. So, for those of you who have been following along on the home game, you know that XCL allows you to collect all sorts of data from pretty much any type of content. And we have set up a process to do that that's simple and easy, and we do all the magic behind the scenes. Rob Christie is joining us today on the Build Capable team, who is the mastermind behind the technology side of this. And so he's done a lot of work to make sure that you don't have to. And today we're going to be talking about some pretty nerdy stuff, but the good news is that we've done all the hard work. We're going to talk about the easy button, if you will, for what can you do with all this data that you collect. And so I would love to introduce Art and Duncan. They're going to be talking to us about xACTION today. Corrine is here. We'll probably ask some questions and make us demystify some things. So we're really looking forward to today's session. So let's kick this off. Tell me, what is xACTION?
Not a problem. xACTION, again, really was initially born from the pandemic. We had a number of clients that were doing live in-person training and suddenly couldn't do live in-person training anymore and moved to AR, VR training, but that didn't talk to their LMS. So they said, we need a way to basically just sweep completion records in. Not a overly complicated task, but you think about the amount of data that's generated by a simulation like that, right? It can be daunting. I said, okay, so let's enable these VR simulations to send XAPI statements. Art did some work with the group there and got the coding in place to send those statements. And then we essentially just built a trigger. If I see this and this happen, I know that Duncan has completed fire extinguisher training, right? And it would call the API for the LMS that says create new history record and would populate that. Then they wanted to use it a lot, right? So there was suddenly this big growth to it. And they said, oh, you know what? We really should separate this out so it's independent of what LRS someone uses, as long as it's compatible and follows the standard. And we can do a few different things, right? Clearly, we could call an API to update some other system, pass along data like we were doing with the LMS. But we also realized that a lot of times you have a very noisy transactional LRS that collects more data than you need, and you want to just very selectively or intelligently forward some statements over to an authoritative LRS or another system. And then the third thing was, if we're already capturing this data and we've got rules we can match to say that this thing happened, we could also, let's say, transform the statements that came through. And it was very much in the same way that you guys have done with XCL is say, okay, let's standardize some language here. Because if I'm getting limited value statements, say from a rapid development authoring tool, but I have a governance model and a language that I'm using, some kind of master data model that I need to use for reporting or for passing on to another system. Let's take and say, all right, if these three statements come in, I'm going to issue a new statement that uses my vocabulary, my verbiage, so I can have some consistency there. So that's really where things started out, and then realized that we wanted to make that process as simple as possible. So added some features around importing and being able to tie things in that were just canned standard features or standard functions, I guess, more than features. But that's really where we began.
Yeah, I love that. I think that was a big driver behind why I reached out to you, Art, whenever we were working on a project back last year. We had a client come to us and say, I have this set of requirements that I need to know if we can meet because this set of requirements has made it cost prohibitive to try to use an LMS. And for some of these requirements, an LMS couldn't even meet that need. And for those of you who were at DevLearn last year, literally the week that we launched XCL publicly, we won an award with the team at RISC by pairing XCL and xACTION together to meet these requirements. And I'll just talk through some of these requirements because at the beginning of these requirements, we started off with, okay, they want to deliver content to 500,000 people. This was a nonprofit, it was an external audience, so a public audience. They wanted to deliver different types of content. It was things like videos and PDFs and e-learning, right? So nothing out of the ordinary. They also wanted to track progress, but it started to get sticky when they said, but we don't want the learners to have to create an account. And I'm like, there goes all your LMSs, right? You're not going to be able to do that. And then we got into, could we bookmark progress, right? Could we make sure that if somebody goes into this training content and then they leave and then they come back, that it can put them back in the same place? How do you do that if they don't create an account? How do you know who they are? And so some of these requirements, if this had been prior to, let's say, 2013, these requirements would be ridiculous. Like you wouldn't be able to do them very easily, if at all, at least not with common e-learning authoring tools. And then we had things like, can you make it really fast? Can you make it really easy? Because there have been, for the last decade, ways to do a lot of this stuff using XAPI, using the XAPI standard and hosting it on your website, on your own server, using XAPI to track the data. Authoring tools will bookmark people back as long as it knows who that person is, right? Whether it's an IP address or an actual authentication or an account. But that wasn't easy and it wasn't fast. And it certainly wasn't inexpensive if you didn't have the skill set to do it. You'd have to hire an organization to do it. And there are only a handful of companies that know how to even set that up. Most companies are like, I don't do XAPI stuff, I do SCORM stuff, which is not going to get you any of this. And then you get into things like making sure that it's accessible, making sure that you can also bookmark people who are coming in anonymously, right? You don't even have their name or their personal information, and making sure that it was affordable. And on top of all of this stack of requirements, they also wanted to be able to give people a certificate or a badge or add completion to their transcript and do all of this without an account. And the reason why they didn't want people to have to create accounts because it was a public audience. And can you imagine how much it would cost for an LMS for 500,000 active users a month? I don't even want to think about it. And just if you even were to work out a deal with a learning platform company for that many users, think about the number of LMS administrators you would need when people in the general public are getting locked out of their accounts because you know that they're not going to remember their password. So these were the requirements where we actually set up this pair. And like Duncan said, with xACTION being born in the pandemic out of a need, XCL, same thing. It was built out of a need. We needed a tool to be able to automate some of this stuff that we had been doing manually for a long time. And we were like, how can we standardize this and make it more accessible to more people? That's where XCL came from. So we paired these two tools together because we could do the delivery of content, we could do tracking, we could do anonymous bookmarking. We could do all of these things using xAPI, and we could set up all the processes to do this and automation of that stuff. What we couldn't do is take the data and have something else happen with it. We could, but that's not what we focused on. We actually partnered. Then that's when I reached out to you, Art, to say, can you take this data that we're collecting and then trigger some things to happen? And that's where we partnered up to work on this together. And the three things that we had set up were certificates, badges, and transcripts. But Art, maybe tell us a little bit more about what are some of the things we can do with this data in xACTION.
Yeah, let me show you the one slide you'll see in this entire presentation here. There's a lot of stuff on here. I'm just going to talk about a few things that are relevant to this discussion. One of the things we wanted to do with the XCL and the customer that Sarah had was they wanted to be able to issue certificates. So they could be something Credly or Credible, or just email them a PDF with a certificate and a congratulations note. But they only wanted them to get the certificate if they completed 3 particular modules of the training. Since XCL provided XAPI statements to content that wasn't necessarily XAPI, we knew what those statements are going to be. We could build rules in xACTION that said, if you see those 3 statements, then send them an email with a generated certificate and congratulations that they finished that course. There's a lot of other things that xACTION can do. It can basically call any system with a REST API. So it is translating and collating your XAPI data and generating a call to a third-party REST API to do something with your data. Another thing that we did with this example with Sarah's product is the live transcript or a learner record. We were able to write an entry to an online service that said, here's a list of all of the training that's completed, and we have the XAPI statements to show that it was done. You could also update things like an HRIS if you just wanted to sign off that somebody did the training and the HRIS has a REST API. xACTION could call it and let the HRIS know that the action had been completed, or a curriculum had completed, or a competency had been met, or just update an LMS. If you have to have a corporate LMS and you need to update it, but you want to do your training easily and simply, as in the example that Sarah showed, then we could update the LMS just like we do with the VR training. We look for certain statements. Once we get it, we call the REST API that the LMS has, and we update it.
And what I love about this list is that those things in bold were some of the things that we had explored for this project, but you could unlock doors, right? You can post messages to Teams or Slack. You could do things in Zoom. This is what I love about both of these products, right? XCL and xACTION. We've essentially deconstructed learning technology to say this will plug and play based on what you want it to do. You can deliver content, you can track the data, you can use that data to do other things. And in a world of everybody talking about AI and agents and things like that, you're going to have the infrastructure underneath that to make these things work. And our tool is patent pending because we just submitted for it last year. xACTION is already patented. And so going through this process of thinking about how do we deliver content headlessly to people on demand when they need it in the flow of work, track it, and then use that data to perform other functions or automate different processes, this is the technology pair that you would use. And it doesn't exist anywhere else.
So have you guys seen the announcement coming out of ServiceNow?
Yep,
okay,
I saw it this morning.
So I think, and I'm going to have to post on LinkedIn about it because I'm like, my wheels were spinning. But so if you haven't seen the news, ServiceNow basically announced creating headless learning network that integrates in with the ServiceNow platform so that if you want to deliver learning and have it integrated in with work processes, ServiceNow is moving into that model, leveraging AI. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, oh, we need to call them. And Duncan, you should call them too. Because I think one of the things that organizations are going to start thinking about, and we've been talking about the LMS is dead for years, and it is not dying quickly, if it is dying at all. But there are organizations and there are models that maybe will not need a learning platform. What they really will need is some combination of XCL and xACTION to be able to collect and track the data and then send that in or integrate in with other systems within your ecosystem. And I think thinking about how to build those experiences, now that we're seeing some of the big tech that are focused on business use cases, like saying, hey, we know that there's learning involved and there's things that are happening and we want to bring that data in. It's the perfect example of, hey, wrap your content with XCL, store that data in a standardized way, let xACTION take that data and surface it throughout your ecosystem where it makes sense, whatever that use case is, whether it's an email notification or a certificate or opening a door. There's the mechanisms to do those things now for organizations that either haven't invested in a learning platform yet and are trying to think about what this new future ecosystem looks like, But even if you have an LMS, which is my favorite thing about that slide, is like, if you have an LMS, if you have an HRIS system, if you have a CRM system, this data can be surfaced in those systems through xACTION. You just got to start saving it in a way that can be used. So I think that's when I think about the potential from a business perspective, and I think about where the industry is heading, and I see announcements like from ServiceNow, where ServiceNow is like, we think we can figure out how to support learning use cases in the flow of work, truly. Like, these are tools that will make that possible for organizations that are trying to figure out how to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
to me, it builds on the old model of the LMS, which I consider a giant Swiss Army knife. And yes, you have giant things and they can do all these different things. You probably use 10% of those things, and those things that you're using are really not great. The little fork, yes, you could eat with it, but it's not an ideal dining experience. But I think we're moving more towards best of breed. And with best of breed, maybe you have to have records in an LMS just for long-term storage, for reporting to regulatory and agencies, for doing some of the things. But wouldn't it be nice to be able to deliver your training really quickly and easily with XCL, and then have that LMS be updated because corporate may want it to be that way with xACTION. And so you get the best of breed. You get them storing the data they need to store. You get an easy setup and an easy delivery, simple for students.
I now want to have a little fork visual for an LMS, a tiny fork.
Don't use this for carving your Thanksgiving turkey.
It's probably a spork.
I was going to say, in addition, I feel like it really changed the perspective that we have an opportunity to come in and look at what we want training data to do now, where in the past it was, okay, I need to deliver a piece of content that someone takes online, or I need to let someone register for a class and maybe do conflict checking or whatever those things. So we were fairly linear and boxed in what we did. Where now, what technology do we have? What do we want to be able to do? Because I'm not going to say it's limitless, but it's radically expanded. I've had, just as a playing around for fun example, I've had xACTION turn on and off a light switch, just a regular Wi-Fi enabled switch, because they have an API. You get out and play with it. Okay. I don't know a good use case for that. If I did ever need some kind of training completion to turn on the coffee pot or to start a disco ball, I could make that happen.
I do want disco ball enabled. Like, I want it to throw confetti, but not actual confetti because it's a mess. But could I have that happen? Now I actually need that in my life. I didn't think about disco ball after completion. That's very exciting.
We could definitely turn on a disco ball if you took proper disco ball training.
And so I think that, oh, that's a good one. Jacob says in the chat, if a learner has an epiphany, you turn on the light bulb. That would be also a little scary, like ghost-like, I think.
As long as the next API statement came out of it, it's doable.
Yep.
But I think that one of the things that came up for me when I first learned about xACTION is, can I just use Zapier to do this? Can't I just have a piece of data happen? So they completed the training. Now I want you to trigger this other thing to happen. One of the things that came up during our discussion for our project is, can I take multiple things that happen? So don't trigger this thing to happen until this and this. Then I want you to trigger that thing to happen, right? They had to take an e-learning module. They had to watch a video. They had to download a PDF. Like, there were certain steps. Historically, we would package all that stuff up into an LMS and be like, here's your course, right? In real life, it doesn't always make a lot of sense to do all that in one sitting. And sometimes it's not practical. So how can we space that out? What's best for learning and that kind of thing. And so what I like about how xACTION works is that it listens for this data to come in. And once all of the requirements are met, then it triggers the thing to happen. And so I don't know if there's anything that Art or Duncan you want to share about, like, what makes this different than the automation tools that already existed.
Well, that's one of them, that it can look for multiple statements. So if somebody, as you said, needs to get a competency, they could take a training module, They could take a test, and maybe an assessor has to review them performing a task, and the tool he uses also sends a statement. When all three of those things are done, xACTION can take an action, but it's a many-to-many action. So as in our Demo Fest example, we sent an email to someone, we generated a certificate for them, we made an entry in an online resume system, all because all of the statements that we need came in, so we fire all of the outbound actions simultaneously.
Which, basically picking up from where we talked about skills last week, Kareen, when we talk about all of the things that organizations are trying to do around skill development, a skill assessment, that kind of thing, it's not just one thing, it's multiple things, right? And so
Yeah.
this thinking about multiple things that I'm tracking on.
I think the skills example is a really interesting one, and we could do a whole half an hour maybe just on how to think about that. But you're right, Sarah. The reality is for skill data to be meaningful, it's more than one piece of data and it's from more than one source, and you're pulling information from across the organization. So how do you then synthesize that to put it into action? There's really interesting implications for folks that are thinking about how to put skill data to use and how to aggregate that data and then take the aggregate and take the action, whatever that action is. I think it's really interesting. Yeah.
And the traditional model is if you wanted that, you had to standardize it in a format that an LMS would take so that you could package it all up and say, okay, they've done all these things, which forced us to use certain e-learning authoring tools, certain content formats, and forcing people to go log into a system to do a thing. So all of the things that the business says that they want, that is not supported by an LMS model and hasn't been for a very long time.
If I think about what's happened, and this is just with skill data, and I would imagine that this is happening in different use cases as well, but I'm closest to skills. LMSs don't capture the data that's needed to support a skill strategy. HRISs don't capture the skill data. Now, both of them have pieces of it, but they don't have the full story, and they don't often talk to each other from a data perspective. So it's hard to get the data to talk to each other. And so what's emerged are these skills platforms, which now you're talking about, I've got an HRIS and now I've got an LMS that I'm investing in. And now I have to buy a skills data platform because neither one of those will support my use case. And so organizations are getting to the point where they're investing in platform after platform to be able to collect, aggregate, and make sense of data. Sometimes they're investing in analytics platforms, sometimes they're building whole skills infrastructures, but they're investing in tools. And what I like about this model is that you can do the same thing without investing in all those platforms and tools just by thinking about the data standardization up front and then tying that into the action that it takes. So for organizations that are investing in all of these platforms, the day is going to come, not very far from now, where they're going to look around at all these systems that they've invested in to solve this data aggregation and sense-making problem that then ties into trigger actions and say, do we actually need all of this?
And to your point, currently XCL and xACTION, they don't just do the things that these platforms do, they do way more because it's unlocked. It's unlocked and helps all this be interoperable so that you can decide what you need and have all of those things happen and set up your rules and make sure that you're getting the data out that you need. Duncan mentioned standardization, right? We're standardizing the data going in, what data to expect. You know what triggers to look for. Like it's you being in control of this instead of all of these vendor systems that are all locked down that serve, to your point, Kareen, like unique their own purposes, right? The whole purpose of an LMS was compliance. These people have done these things. And that was part of a business need. But what if you could get that business need met without that clunky system and be able to power all the other things that you're actually trying to do from a data business perspective? That's what these tools allow you to do.
And even if you have those clunky systems and you spent money on all those resources, maybe you don't need a human being to send an email that somebody got a certificate after they completed 3 courses. And that human could be more efficient and more effective for your organization if they weren't doing that.
Are you saying it's 2025 art and we shouldn't have to
I'm
do
trying to without saying it, but go ahead.
Oh, I think back to Corinne's point too, especially with skills and being able to manage skills versus what am I say the old LMS model where, like Sarah said, was a check in the box, right? I've done this thing, I've shown that I'm capable of welding a thing or driving a piece of equipment or doing whatever happens. But it's very, very point in time where with tools like these together, we really can look at things over the course of time longitudinally because skills can degrade, right? And you say, okay, yep, you learned to do this 15 years ago. I can tell you right now, I'm certain there's a trainee record for me going through a Word Perfect class sometime in the 90s, but I'm not proficient in Word Perfect now. That's just not reality. So to be able to keep these things evergreen and say, okay, this is when it's appropriate maybe to have another training intervention, or maybe this is just not something that we need any longer.
Yeah, I love that. And I think we've given people about 30 minutes of information about these tools, how they work together. I think what we can do is end on an announcement that if you are interested in having the power of xACTION along with your XCL account or subscription, you can just reach out to us at Build Capable, and we are partnered with xACTION to plug in as an add-on what features and functions you want to have happen so we can have that discussion, and then we can get connected with both teams, get you connected with both teams, so that way we can have some discussions about what you're trying to do and how we can power the systems that you want to have in place or that you're already using and have that connectivity, that interoperability across your platforms. So Art, Duncan, thank you so much for joining us for today's
Bet.
session. Thank you for
Uh,
partnering with us on that project too. This was really born out of a real business need. And I think that was a huge opportunity for us to innovate and create something that would be super helpful for what we look for that we need in this industry.
It's exciting
Thank you.
times. I think we just keep moving on it. All right. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks
Yep.
everyone.